I know that it's possible for an author to write a really interesting male character who does absolutely despicable things throughout the narrative, but you end the narrative not just hating him. This same thing can't be said in Lady of Hay. At the suggestion of my husband, I am going to be using a euphemism for the majority of this review. If you're not familiar with how ducks sexually reproduce, male and female ducks are quite literally in an evolutionary arms race with each other. Duck male genitalia is horrifying as a result. The reason I'm using this euphemism is because I cannot discuss this book without talking about pretty serious sexual assault. So I am going to say the word duck whenever I am talking about a sexual assault. One of my favorite books growing up was The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. This is an epic novel that follows a family over the course of a few generations, right before the Chilean and during the Chilean Revolution. The main character is generally Esteban, who is the patriarch of the family. You also have Clara, who is the matriarch of what becomes the family. I bring up House of the Spirits because I actually brought this to a book club that I ran many years ago with a group of friends. And one of my favorite exercises that we did in this book club was, after reading this book, I asked my friends how they felt about Esteban. Did they feel that he was evil, that he was irredeemable? The consensus was, no, he's not evil. He's extremely complex. Because Esteban is a really bad person. He ducks women outright throughout the novel. He has many illegitimate children as a result of these duckings, and he denies the majority of them. He actually only acknowledges one, if I remember correctly. This is not a good man, but he is a complicated and complex man and character. The reason I bring him up at all is because I know that it's possible for an author to write a really interesting male character who does absolutely despicable things throughout the narrative, but you end the narrative not just hating him. He's not a caricature, he's a whole person. And because he's a whole person, you don't end up hating him. You end up feeling very complex feelings about this character. This same thing can't be said for the male duckers in Lady of Hay by Barbara Erskine. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing her name, Erskine or Erskine. I'm going to just say the author from this point forward. If you are a fan of a type of time travel and historical fiction, this author has a lot of books that you should definitely check out. She specifically takes historical figures and creates a modern day reincarnation of them. That is her bread and butter as an author. It's an interesting idea. The first book that she wrote was Lady of Hay. This novel was published in 1986. The gender politics on display in not just the medieval times, or rather the historical times, but the modern day in the book, actually particularly in the modern day of the book, are pretty dire. It's really upsetting, to be frank. There were quite a few times where I would read a scene and have to take a break from the book because it was so incredibly upsetting. It's not just that the gender politics are regressive, it's that they are actively harmful in this book. A good example of that is the duckist in the book is sympathized with in a way that the main female character is never sympathized with. One character, after hearing about what he did and seeing the bruises on the main character because it was a brutal ducking, says how he must feel so confused. It's really gross. It's really gross. So to summarize the book, I'm going to read my notes because I can't remember the full summary. The main character is Joanne Clifford. She is called Jo throughout the book. The story opens with a prologue where two men are hypnotizing university students to try and draw out any past life memories. Okay, so we start with a prologue that introduces us to the concept of reincarnation in past lives. The woman who they hypnotize in the scene has a horrible flashback. She ends up dying, like her heart ends up stopping because of the trauma of the flashback that she's had. And they're able to revive her and jointly decide to banish all memories of what just happened to her so that she doesn't remember the trauma that she just experienced. One of the men, Sam, also reflects on how lovely she is and how he really wants to try taking her out if he can. We barely hear from the woman herself. I don't even know that she's named at this point. She might be. I honestly don't remember, but I don't remember her being named. I remember the two men, and I remember the decision that they make after she dies from them bringing up a past life experience, which was traumatic for her. And that was not their fault. They didn't realize that that was going to happen, certainly. But they did decide unilaterally to banish the memory from her so that she would be okay without asking her or even revealing to her, hey, your heart stopped. You may need to go to the hospital to get that checked out, make sure that you're okay. Because she's dead for at least 20 to 30 seconds, if I'm not mistaken. They don't give her that benefit. We learn quickly that Jo exists in this book as a prop for men to manipulate and ogle. And that's a real shame because the historical figure, the Lady of Hay, her real name was Maud, and I'm going to put her full name. She has actually several full names, so I may put multiple names on the screen. She was kind of a badass. So she lived in the time of King John I. She had 16 children with her husband. I don't know how many of those children survived, but they did have 16 children. She was given a castle by her husband, and she defended it successfully against a very, very large invading force. She actively supported her husband's political ambitions. Ultimately, she was a victim of King John directly, because it was an open secret that King John had his nephew murdered. Very open secret. It is also thought that the Lady of Hay's husband was involved, or at least was told about this by King John, and told her, presumably in private, as husband and wife having a conversation, that King John had murdered his nephew. When her husband William fell out of favor with King John over time, which it seems to be mostly because he was extremely powerful, he was garnering a lot of land, it kind of did seem like he was going to be making a bigger play for power. So King John decided to call in all of his financial debts simultaneously. To guarantee that William was actually going to pay these financial debts, he demanded Maud and their oldest son, William, as ransom. Maud refused, and in her refusal, it is strongly believed by historians that she specifically said something along the lines of, "This man killed his own nephew. Why would I trust him not to kill us?" Honestly, fair critique, but King John was not known for his temperance or his kindness. And as a result of having done this, he locked her and her oldest son, William, together in a tower and left them to starve to death. There's a bit of gruesome detail in that when the tower or the room was finally opened, they were found with her son William leaned up against the wall. She was kind of curled into his lap, and there are reports that she may have eaten part of her own son's face. Very gruesome. Now, having heard that story and heard about her involvement with King John, what he did to her, would you think You know who two potential soulmates could be? Because that's what this author did. This author took a tragic situation of a mother and her oldest son being starved to death by King John, a famously cruel king, in fact, and said King John and this woman were probably supposed to be a romantic relationship together. It's really, honestly, very off-putting. The more I dug into the actual history, the worse this got. John's treatment of Maud and her son was in fact so cruel that it led to Clause 39 of the Magna Carta that John was ultimately forced to sign by the nobles of the day, which reads, "No man shall be taken, imprisoned, outlawed, banished, or in any way destroyed, nor will we proceed against or prosecute him except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land." So quite literally, her treatment by King John was so bad that the nobles said, never again, we are going to limit the king's power. We are going to put a clause in that specifically says no punishment without a trial by the law of the land. The king cannot unilaterally lock a mom and her oldest son in a tower until they starve to death. That will no longer be allowed. Nearly 900 years later, this author looks at this circumstance and says, you know, I bet John and Maud / Mathilde, they probably could have been lovers. They probably should have been destined lovers. I'm gonna go on just a bit of a tangent here because I really need to convey just how much of a piece of shit King John really was. I spoke with my historian British husband to get some of this correct. So you really need to grasp the levels of why this guy, why this man, and why one of his most famous victims, so famous in fact, that they made a clause in the Magna Carta because of what you did to her. The man was known for doing things like accepting a surrender and then proceeding to cut the hands and feet off of everyone as an example. And what that meant was people learned, okay, you don't surrender to King John because he's gonna mess you up. So with all of that established, let me take some time to go through this book. I am gonna be referring to my notes a lot because there were so many things about this that I hated that I really, really need to be specific. I will say, if you have read and loved this book, awesome. I'm really happy for you. I also would remind you that she has written quite a few books in this same kind of genre. So check them out. If you liked her writing here, there's a lot more to explore, and I very much so hope that she got better over time. One thing that I have considered doing is checking out one of her later books, just to compare. I believe the last one that I saw that she had published was 2024, and I would be interested. That's almost 20 years in between. So maybe her writing has changed significantly in a way that I would enjoy. It's a little hard for me to want to check it out because I hated this book so much, but it might be worthwhile. You never know. Jo is brutally ducked by her ex-boyfriend in this book. And then Maud in the past is brutally ducked by King John. So the implication in terms of the past life and reincarnation and cycles and destiny and fate that this book is setting up is that this poor woman is destined to be brutally ducked by the same man over hundreds of years of reincarnations. It's not very romantic. In terms of the horrible gender politics, I'm going to read how Maud is being described in this scene and then tell you the context of the scene. Now she had slimmed back with the resilience of youth to a lithe tautness. Only the fullness of her breasts betrayed the recent childbirth, and as she moved her head, the heavy curtain of her hair swung forward to hide them from him. She is being described as really, really sexy just a few weeks after giving birth and also in the process of being ducked by William, her husband in the past. It's pretty gross. There's another scene where her ex-boyfriend, whose name is Nick, comes upon Joe and his brother, Sam, we'll get to Sam, in a clearly weird situation. He walks in, Joe is clearly upset. Now, Sam is a hypnotist. He actively hypnotized her, forced her to disrobe while hypnotized. Nick comes upon his ex, Joe, having clearly been hypnotized by Sam. She also is in a different set of clothing than she was before. He ends up finding the clothing that Sam forced her to remove from herself while she was under his hypnotic control. Nick comes upon this, sees that the door was bolted in a way that Joe never does. She never bolts her door for some reason. Sees that there's clothing that she says, I don't remember taking that off or putting that there, knows that Sam hypnotized her before Nick got there, and proceeds to get angry and jealous at her because he thinks she's having an affair with Sam. May a love like this never find me. Joe is also often described as imperturbable, confident, hard, stoic. She's a journalist, and she's described as all of these incredible character traits that we never see. All that we ever see is Joe being characterized as vulnerable, naive, easy to manipulate, honestly not very smart, and obsessed with her ex, who, let me repeat, brutally ducks her during the book, and she continues to want to be with him, and other people sympathize with him after she tells them some version of what happens. There's one particular line that I highlighted because it really emphasized to me that this character is not that smart. She's saying to Nick who she's with because she wants to be with him all the time throughout the book, regardless of what he does, regardless of the fact that Nick is honestly just kind of an asshole before he brutally ducks her. She says to him, trying to convince him to take her to a location, the Downs can't have changed all that much, or the river. Now, the past life that we're investigating was during the time of King John, which was over 800 years ago. Nearly 1,000 years, truly, nothing could have changed. There's honestly no other way to describe a lot of the dialogue and descriptions in this book other than this author being a really intense duck apologist. Staring up at him, she was overwhelmed suddenly by pity as she recognized the deep unhappiness in his eyes behind the closed, hard mask. This is Joe looking at Nick after he's brutally ducked her. So brutal, in fact, that she has bruises for a good chunk of the rest of the book. On the topic of the incredible gender politics of this book, this is another direct quote from Nick after he has brutally ducked Joe, and they are discussing this over a meal. He says, "You enjoyed it when I you the other night." That's a direct line. Also, there's so much pining for Nick, enough so that we're talking to another character with whom we have now had sort of consensual sex, kind of, and at the end of that experience, this character, whose name is Tim, reveals who his past life is, because all of the men around Joe in the modern day are all reincarnations of the men from Matilda's life back in King John times. This is, again, after Nick has brutally ducked her. She says to Tim, "Oh, Tim, I'm sorry, but I so wanted it to be Nick." There was a point in this book where I found myself actually physically scowling at it. Literally, my face was twisted in such a way that my muscles were uncomfortable because I was scowling so hard at the book. I'm going to read what Nick is doing and then tell you the context of the scene. He bent over her, her being Joe, and kissed her fiercely, his eyes closed as he felt the complex web of anger and frustration and desire ride over him. In this exact moment in the book, Joe is being ducked by King John in the past memory. Another awesome quote, which is more duck apologia from the book, is another female character talking to Nick. Again, everybody knows at this point that are the characters of this book that Nick has brutally ducked Joe, or at least done something to her, because she has bruises from that point on in the story. I expect you've been overworking, what with the worry about Desco and everything, she added, as matter-of-factly as she could. That might explain it all. Because, you know, boys will be boys. He was stressed out, so he needed to work it out. That's how that works. My husband's faces are really wonderful.
The sheer visceral revulsion.
Mm-hmm. At one point in the book, there's an actual plot point that if Joe is actually experiencing a past life from a person at the time of King John, what years are that, honey?
1190s.
1190s. She should not be speaking modern English, right? Because she's supposedly this person during these times, and so she should not be speaking modern English. They bring in a linguistic expert who can speak the version of Welsh that Joe should be speaking. Yes, honey? Questions?
She's Norman. She's speaking French.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that comes up. So, hold on. These are my notes. She does end up speaking Welsh. It's an early Middle Welsh form. This is a quote from the book. It's an early Middle Welsh form that has disappeared. And also very odd is her use of the verbal particle ry with the pronoun -e, meaning them, following it. Such usage is very early. So during this scene, I wrote, wait, she's speaking Welsh but not French or any language other than Welsh and then modern English. But the book actually addresses this in a later quote. Wendy, who's the linguistic expert, spun around to look at him. I don't remember who him is in this scene. She speaks modern English, she said sharply. Using your criterion, I would expect her to speak the language of Layman, or even more likely Norman French, but not the English of the 1980s. You know, hanging a lampshade on your plot hole doesn't make it less of a plot hole. It's just a hole with a hat in it.
Enough hat, it can cover the hole.
It's a big lampshade. It's a massive lampshade. It's as big as is needed. Also, same scene, we've got this professional linguist who proposes that perhaps Joe is possessed, which apparently is more believable than a past life.
Split the difference. She's possessed by the ghost of Matilda, Lady of Hay.
I think that's kind of what the linguist was getting at, but it doesn't make even the tiniest bit. Like, why would being possessed by a ghost be more likely than just reincarnation?
Yeah,
it's just, they're equally silly ideas. Like, there's no reason for one of those to be the better option versus the other.
My woo is more believable than you.
My woo is superior to your woo. This is a scene with Sam. So I don't think I've talked about this. So Joe is the supposed reincarnation of the Lady of Hay, aka Maud, aka Matilde, aka a few other names. Nick is revealed to be the reincarnation of John, of the King John. And Sam, his brother, is revealed to be the reincarnation of William, who was Maud's actual husband back in the 1190-ish era. And so this is Sam talking to, I think, Nick, maybe? No, he's talking to a lady. I think he might be talking to Joe. I don't actually know. He's talking to somebody at this point. But he says, she, being Maud/Matilda, had betrayed William first, Sam said sharply. She had driven him too far. He was a coward, she retorted. A bully and a coward. Sam flinched visibly beneath her scorn. He paid for that last betrayal, he said. He paid. Dear God, how he wanted to make reparation. Don't you think he wanted to return to save her? So this is the book acknowledging what King John did to Maud/Matilde and their oldest son. This whole time, I just kept thinking, and also telling my husband, this book is really honestly haunted by an interesting idea. It's haunted by the ghost of an interesting idea. The concept that her husband, like Maud's husband, back in the 1190s, saw what happened to his wife and oldest son and felt so guilty about it that the modern reincarnation of him happened to also be reincarnated as a brother to King John's reincarnation and was seeking to do better by his lady from back in the day, that he's carried this guilt over the course of almost 1,000 years. That's a really interesting idea. That's not the book we get, though. Nick and Joe are destined to be together, aka Maud and Matilde and King John are destined to be together, and Sam, aka William, is just destined to fail both times. And the second time, once he's failed, he jumps off of a balcony because he's sad about failing, and Joe and Nick end up riding off into the sunset together. It's really gross. Also, Sam tries to duck her several times, so don't think that he's like a good guy in this book. I just want to be really clear. No men are good in this book. If you're a male, you are like unto a duck. You are a predator, and that is all that you are. One other major issue that this book has is that it keeps skipping over the really interesting historical events of the actual Lady of Hayes' life. So another example, and I am likely absolutely massacring this name, so I'm going to put it on the screen so that you can see what the word is. The people of Aberhandu had suffered terribly from their losses in the plague and the poor harvest, and she knew that they and all her vast estates faced untold hardships, if not starvation, in the coming winter. We don't get to see any of that. We don't get to see her actually doing that. We don't actually get to see her defending the land and castle that her husband gave to her. We just learn about the aftermath of it. It's very obvious that the author's interest does not lie in what was actually really cool and interesting about this particular historical figure, but instead lies in making her the destined soulmate of the man who murdered her. And also in both the past and present brutally ducked her. So romantic. What a prince. Another thing that comes up several times is Maud has some kind of like hedge witch knowledge, is sort of how it's depicted. It's never explicitly called witchcraft or sorcery, what have you, but she was partially raised by a woman who was able to do some, I guess you would call it hedgecraft, and she learned some of it, but it's not a major part of the book. It's not a major part of the story. It's just something that's kind of mentioned a few times. But at some point, people in the past start calling Maud a witch. Now, that is more historically accurate, potentially. There are a lot of really interesting legends related to her. There's one legend in Wales where she built an entire castle by herself overnight by carrying the blocks like in her apron or dress. Really, like, this woman was amazing, and this is what we've done to her. Why? I don't actually know why she's being called a witch, because it's never set up in the book that that's something we should be worried about or a problem.
Who's calling her a witch, by the way?
This is like a maid or something. Her name is Tilda.
Okay.
Oh no, it's her own daughter. Actually, that's a really good question. Her own daughter is the one who calls her a witch. She also apparently has a bad relationship with her mother. Never explained. This daughter, I'm so glad you asked this question, actually. This daughter is the child of Maud and Richard de Clare, who is another guy who was around in the 1190s, who the actual Maud is not thought or known to have had any kind of affair with, had any kind of children with. So what the author does is make them like the longing, forlorn love interests with each other who have sex just a couple of times. And one of those times results in a child named Tilda, who is emotionally stunted, feels no apparent emotion toward her mother or really her family generally, or kind of really at all, looks like Richard de Clare. William never figures it out. Their last scene together is Tilda calling her mother an evil witch and throwing in her support with the Welsh man that she's married to, Tilda, And then that's the last you ever see of her. You don't ever see her again. This is relevant because earlier in the book, the older nanny, who was kind of the hedge witch, made a prediction that this daughter was going to be the reason that Maud was like ended or hurt, or something was going on with like a prophecy almost, that this child was going to be her downfall, essentially. Doesn't come up. Tilda disappears from the story and is never mentioned again. She just disappears. It's incredible. I'm so glad you asked that question. Thank you.
I mean, it's kind of refreshing for a prophecy to be wrong.
Well, but then it's just like, why is it there? Because there's nothing about a prophecy in the historical narrative.
Yeah.
And also, there's nothing about this person being an illegitimate child of William. So we created an affair and a whole child of that affair. Why?
Yeah.
Because they had like 16 kids. Like, these people got busy. I don't remember how many survived. I mean, at least 5 of them survived to adulthood, but like, they had a lot of kids. And it's just kind of weird to take one of the kids who survived to adulthood and be like, that definitely was not their joint biological child. Yeah. And this was a biological child with some other guy who is not thought to have had any kind of relationship outside of potentially a friendship. Yeah. But also there's a prophecy that doesn't exist in the literature, the historical literature. Granted, it was one Google search, you know, but it's great. What a great book. There's one other character who I will mention named Judy. I don't know who Judy was supposed to be in the past lives. It's never clarified, but it's pretty clear that she was supposed to be somebody. Possibly Tilda? It's never really clarified. But she's the only person of any sense. Sam comes over at one point after Joe has been hypnotized by him again and once again managed to not be brutally ducked by him. So he's really upset about this. He goes over to Judy's house for some reason. He tries to brutally duck her, and Judy fights him off, manages to fight him off, locks herself in her room, calls the police on him, and has him arrested. Hell yeah, Judy, get it. Now, I want to be clear that this author has extremely horrible gender politics. So Judy is also the mean girl to end all mean girls. Like, she has been trying to mess up Joe's life and break her and Nick up, even though they're not actually a couple. They are exes throughout the majority of the book. But they're pining for each other the whole time, even after he brutally ducks her. What a prince. I can totally see why Judy wants to be with this man. She is the only one who has occasional moments where she acts like what I would want someone to act like in this circumstance. And she's still a terrible person. Everybody sucks in this book, but Judy at least acts like a real person sometimes. And one of those times is when Sam comes in and tries to attack her, and she's like, I'm calling the police and your ass is going to jail. And he does. It's great. This is one of the lines that the author includes. I don't remember who is saying this. This is them talking about John and how he felt toward Maud, who, if you remember correctly, he locked in a tower with her oldest son until they starved to death. I really need you to keep that in mind as I read this. He loved her, Anne. I really think he loved her, and she found him attractive once he had grown to manhood, and yet they never managed to communicate. They just seemed to knock sparks off each other all the time. The actual scenes where she meets John. The first time she meets him, he's a kid. He's 14 or 15. He's engaged to, I think her name is Isabella. Is that right? His first wife? Whatever this little girl's name is. He does something cruel in front of her, takes the wings off of a sparrow or something like that. And she runs into a room crying, and he's like, what a baby. John is characterized as a straight up psychopath in the book. A couple of times. The 2 times that we meet him before they are talking more because of the political stuff, he is just cruel, and he is interested in Maud the second time they meet, but she rejects him because, she's married, and she doesn't have the liberty of just being with anybody. Even though she has an affair with Richard de Clare. Very consistent morality in this book. But 2, she's not into him. He's much younger than her. He was literally 14 the first time she met him, and she was already early to mid-20s. She's not into the little boy. She doesn't want to duck the little boy. It's just the thing. I can kind of relate. You don't want to duck a little boy. There's another moment with a character who is from the United States. She says, I questioned his royal prerogative. I'm a Republican, don't forget. And I don't know why that didn't say American, because why Republican? So a Democrat wouldn't question a royal prerogative. Honey, as someone who's married to a US born and raised citizen, do you think I would question royal prerogative?
Yes.
Later on in the book, when we have fully committed to, oh yeah, John and Maud were definitely destined to be together, and it was just the hands of fate that kept them apart, there's another line that says, it was Richard who had come between them. Richard never actually comes between John and Maud. Like, there's never a moment where he separated them or, like, distracted Maud from John's attentions or anything like that. John was just a child when they first met, and she wasn't interested in a little kid. That's it. Also, he's implied to act like a psychopath. He literally is known to do things like take the wings off of sparrows as a kid. She's not interested in him. Such a weird thing to say.
In fairness, with serial killers, women marry them all the time.
Oh yeah, serial killers are real sexy. You just didn't know that. God, this is such bullshit. Here's another one. This is another quote. This is Nick, who is trying to calm Jo down from a fit that she just had related to past life shenanigans. He's forcing her to look at him as once more he stroked her forehead, soothing her, relaxing her in spite of her sick terror. I want to remind you that this man has actually brutally ducked her at this point in the story, but it's soothing. His presence is soothing. She's relaxing in his presence. Isn't it romantic? This is another scene of a woman not really caring that Nick and John at this point have both brutally ducked Maud across the span of over 800 years. Nicholas, amid all your problems, your anguish, and your fear for Jo and for yourself, has it ever crossed your mind to acknowledge the fact that your spirit, the kernel of life inside you that is the essential you, has loved one woman for 800 years? You know, including the horrible ducking. Again, in both time periods, so she's destined to be brutally ducked by this guy who's her destiny. There's also a regular plot beat of people telling Jo she mustn't go back into her past lives and her doing it anyway, or her body just kind of naturally doing it. It's constant. It's portrayed as, I guess it's supposed to be a conflict, but the problem is there's no conflict because it just keeps happening. And also the plot wouldn't exist if she didn't do it. So it's just kind of tiresome. All of these men keep telling her, you need to stop going back there. It's bad for you. And she's like, okay. And then she does it again anyway, or it just happens to her. Like, Jo is just an object for things to happen to and for men to look at. That's her only role in this entire story. And to be brutally ducked. Those are her two roles in the story. So the final moments with Sam, who was William in the past life, who fled to France and basically abandoned his family to their fates and feels real bad about it in modern day. It feels bad about the whole, his wife. In the modern day, he flees to France and proceeds to reminisce about how not only did he fail twice, at least, he fled to France both times and he feels real bad about it, and then he jumps off of a balcony. It's absolutely hilarious. What a terrible character. What a terrible arc. There's a good idea in here. The idea of someone being so sad about failing their loved ones so horribly in a past life and then coming back and trying to fix it. That's an inherently interesting idea, and that's not at all the story that this author was interested in telling. Nick and Jo end up together, which apparently is something I was supposed to want for the entire book. I was supposed to be really, really rooting for this couple, which consists of a woman who is basically a plank of wood. She's not really a character. And a guy who brutally ducks her and manipulates her and is honestly just kind of a jerk. There's no point where Nick is a likable character, but they end up getting pregnant and they're gonna have a baby. Aren't you happy? I want to remind you that Nick is the reincarnation of King John, and Jo is the reincarnation of Maud, who King John murdered by locking her in a room with her oldest son and leaving them there until they starved to death. A crime so heinous that it led to Clause 39 in the Magna Carta, destined to be together. This is from her historical note at the end, which the fact that she actually did look up history about this and still thought this story needed to be told this way is telling to me. This is what she says about King John and what he did to Maud. The king's actions have never been satisfactorily explained, even though his patience must have been considerably strained by William's behavior. The viciousness of his treatment of Matilda and Will caused such an outcry at the time, when cruelty and revenge were commonplace, that the king himself felt it necessary later to issue a statement explaining the course of events leading up to the outlawry of William Sr. In this book, that king who treated her so viciously that he had to release a statement about it at a time when kings weren't really held accountable, famously so, that's where the Magna Carta comes in, is destined to be in love with and with the woman that this statement was released about, according to this book. So romantic. The final thing I want to say about this book is I'm really, really surprised that it was written by someone born and raised in England specifically, because all of the English people in this book are trash. They're all horrible people, down to the last one. Jo is barely a character. She's not a good character, but she's not like a bad person. She's just kind of a plank of wood. But all of the other characters who are British are bad people. All of the people who are Welsh are generally good people. But the author is not Welsh, the author is English. And so I just found it very interesting that there does seem to be a very deeply ingrained self-hatred and self-loathing buried within the text of this book, because there is not a single good British person, or rather a single good English person, to be found within this text. Although I'm supposed to root for King John's reincarnation to get with the woman, the reincarnation of the woman he brutally murdered. If you read this book and you liked this book, I really want to hear from you. I want to know what you liked. She has written a ton others like this. So if you did like this book, there's quite a few other books for you to check out. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you haven't read this book, I cannot in good conscience recommend it. It is just not good. It is actually pretty offensive just by virtue of what the plot is, by virtue of who is being depicted, of how they're being depicted, the modern day versus the past life, and how this particular historical character who really existed is being portrayed. It's just horrific. I can't recommend this in good conscience. But if you have read it and you liked it, I'd really like to hear from you, because I hated it. I hated every moment. Thanks for watching.